You start learning about sex from really unhelpful sources. It was something that was going to be done to you rather than something that's done with you. Vulnerability leads to great sex. Asking for what you want in the sense that you're coming at it from a place of, I want it to be even better. If you're just focusing on the accelerator, you're probably not going to get it.
So hello and welcome to the Sinead Says Podcast. This week we have Grace O'Shea, who is an award-winning coach, educator, author. We're talking things all sex, intimacy and relationships today. You guys asked a lot of questions and every season I always bring on some sort of expert in this field to get different perspectives. But I'm so excited to have you. Hi Grace, how are you feeling today?
Hi, I'm so excited to be here as well. Thanks so much. I'm feeling fine. I was sick for the last week, so I'm excited to be back at work. So I hope my brain is sharp today now and I can give you all the answers.
Don't worry, my brain isn't sharp. It just, so we're in this together.
Yeah.
My brain's all over the place. We were just both talking about having severe brain fog. I came out of the hospital and ever since I've came out, because the antibiotics, bacteria, all the jazz. And I just feel like I am all over the place. But I'm really excited to have this conversation because I love talking about all things sex, relationship, intimacy, everything, because I just feel like it's something that needs to be talked about, especially in Ireland. But first, I'd like to ask you like a little bit about you and how you got into this field of work and what brought you here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm originally from County Kerry in Ireland and didn't get any sex ed growing up. As you can imagine, it wasn't great, and most people growing up in that time, like kind of the noughties, I suppose, the earlier noughties didn't get a lot of sex ed. So how I found myself in this work, it was kind of accidental in a way, to be honest. Like I was doing a master's in health promotion and I just naturally ended up gravitating towards the sexual health promotion side of things. It's not something I'd ever previously thought, oh, I'd love to work in that. But then when it was kind of in front of me, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And it's obviously things are changing in Ireland and I wanted to be part of it. So from that master's, then I started doing sex education in schools. So working as a sex educator in schools. I did that for years. That's how I wrote my book, all of that. But I knew I wanted to work with adults. So I also kind of upskilled. I did more courses and I qualified as a sex and intimacy coach then to work with adults. But also there's, I suppose, a personal element to it as well. Like I had my own struggles with sex, with relationships. I'd been in very abusive relationships very young. And also I had severe vaginismus for years. And some of your listeners are going to know what that is. Some of them mightn't, even though it's quite common. And it's essentially where like the vaginal muscles contract too much involuntarily and you mightn't be able to have sex at all, or if you have it, it can be quite painful. So I was going through that for years. So it was kind of the combination of professional kind of accident, finding myself in that job, but also my history and my background made me passionate because I don't want anyone to feel as alone as I did and as bad as I did, basically. That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah. I'd really like to know more about this vaginismus because I feel like, some people might not even recognize what it is in their own body. Is it something that, you always had? Is it something that came when you got older, or how did you recognize what it was and how did you, get the answers you needed for this?
Yeah, so it happens differently for everyone, but the way it happened for me was I kind of always had it. So when I started to try and use tampons when I was like 13, it was literally like a brick wall. I just couldn't get the tampon inside my body. And everyone told me that was normal and I'd get used to it, which to be fair isn't bad advice because the first time you do anything, you're probably going to do it wrong or not know what you're doing. And especially in Ireland, like we've such a culture of shame around particularly that part of our body. I didn't even know the proper terms for the vagina and the clitoris and the urethra and all these bits. Like we don't even grow up knowing our bodies, right? So I kind of thought, okay, it'll get easier. But then trying to have sex, do any kind of sexual acts really, like, anything that involved putting something inside the body, even a finger, like it just wasn't happening. Or if it was very painful. It was a long road. It was a real struggle. I'd love to say, yeah, I got great support and figured it out really quickly. I didn't. I had it. So I became aware of it when I was 13 and I got treatment when I was 21. I actually had to fly to the States for treatment because mine was on the more severe end. And what I needed was actually Botox inside the vagina, which sounds like crazy. But when you think of it, it makes sense because the Botox, it freezes the muscles, so it stops them contracting. So you do the Botox and like Botox wears off, right? So you get the Botox, but then once you've had that, you're giving your body a chance to not react in that way anymore. And then you can do like pelvic floor physio. You can use these things called dilators that just train your muscles to essentially get comfortable with penetration. Thankfully, it was like, once I had that at 21, it was seamless. I had no further issues, like delighted. I mean, it's quite extreme to have to go to the States, right, at 21. Terrifying, but it worked for me. Now, for other women, they mightn't have it as severely, or they might get it later in life, like after a trauma or a traumatic childbirth. It's psychological more than physical. But it's very hard when you're especially that age to try and unravel where the psychological block is coming from. It wasn't until I'd done a lot of therapy where I was like, oh yeah, like there was really sex negative messaging when I was growing up. Like slut shaming was really common. I was told sex was going to hurt the first time, I was going to bleed. Like we get all this awful messaging as girls and women. So no wonder my body kind of shut down and was like, no, we're not exposing you to that. It was trying to look out for me. So yeah, that's kind of how, in a really small nutshell, what happened for me. But like I work with so many women now who have varying levels of vaginismus. So it's really healing to be able to do that now for them.
And I'm sure you bring so much awareness to that as well, so people can really understand. Like obviously I have endometriosis and adenomyosis, and when I started talking about it, you know, people always say like, if you didn't talk about it, I wouldn't know what it is. And I'm sure so many women have experienced this and they've never understood what it is. And like, it's amazing that you can get help, you can get therapy, you can move through psychological blocks. So I feel like thank you for bringing awareness as well.
Oh, thank you so much.
And you spoke on just there about, you know, your education, you're basically your sex ed when you were younger, and you're from the south, aren't you? And I'm from the north. So like, I feel like we got the same sex education, if I'm being truly honest. What did you experience in your like first experience of sex education, or your first understanding of sex, I guess?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to remember because we learn about sex before we actually learn about sex, if that makes sense. Before we learn about reproduction or, okay, the penis goes inside the vagina, that real technical explanation. We're still learning about sexuality long before that. Even as children, you're absorbing messaging in school. As for formal sex education, we just didn't get it. We got to talk about periods, which I suppose in a way, like that was helpful. Now I'm sure like yourself with endometriosis and whatnot, like there was none of that, you know, it was just quite basic. Periods. A lot about hygiene. I was talking about this recently on my own podcast. Lots about hygiene products and the word hygiene being used over and over, which like, okay, talk about it for a little bit, but like there's so much more we need to know, and it kind of makes you feel almost dirty then, you know, like, so we didn't get any. I remember she said, the lady that came in and gave the period talk, she was talking about reproduction, I suppose, a bit as well. And she said, you know, when it comes to sexual intercourse, it's best to just abstain. And then she moved on to the next point. So that was it. Like, so in the absence of getting like good sex ed, which I'm really passionate about, which every young person should be getting, in the absence of that, like you start learning about sex from really unhelpful sources. So I suppose it started off with maybe my peer group, which like, you can imagine now the inaccuracies and the stuff, you know, I was hearing. And even on a more serious side, I think, again, it was quite misogynistic. Like you learned about sex as like it was something that was going to be done to you rather than something that's done with you. And no talk about consent, you know, no talk about proper protection, how to actually properly use it, body image, all those important bits. So I also kind of, once I think I started seeing porn when I was maybe 17 or 18. That's obviously really unrealistic. My sex education, I mean, technically, I suppose I'm still learning. We're all still learning. But mine really didn't properly start, I'd say, till my early 20s, like when I really started seeking out good information. That was my experience. Yeah. And like my parents are wonderful. My mom would have been quite open, but I think she probably assumed that I was learning it elsewhere. So she wasn't exactly sitting down and having loads of chats with me either, if that makes sense. But yeah, I wasn't. I was learning quite negative things, unfortunately.
Yeah, I feel like mine was very similar. Like we had no sex education, no talk about sex. We got to talk about periods, and we got it. I actually even remember them saying, "You have 3 holes down there," and also all being like,
even that,
holes.
Wow.
And I actually remember the teacher goes, "It's not a hole, it's an opening," and I was like. And then we made fun of that the whole class. Like, it's not a hole, it's an opening. That's what I remember. And at the time, obviously, like we weren't even having sex. This was like in primary school. They were obviously just showing us our bodies or whatever. So like absolutely zero sex education. And I actually probably can't remember my first even like exposing to sex. Like the first time I seen it on TV, I can't remember that or anything. I never learned pleasure. I never learned anything like that. And do you know what's crazy? I remember in school, like I had contraception in my body when I was 15 years old, and I didn't have sex until I was 16, 17, or maybe because one of my friends had sex and she was like outside, she was like drinking with friends and she had sex and she can't remember. So us as a group of girls really panicked. And it's mad now because like if we knew about consent and if we knew about education, that would have been reported and that would have been and like it was like we just kind of went like, oh God, we better all get, and like we were scared that she was scared she was going to get pregnant. So we all decided to just, in case that ever happens to us, to all go and get contraception, and not one of us was even sexually active.
That's so
it's
funny.
like such a so strange. And we all ended up with an implant when we were 15 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't have sex until I was near 17. So like it's mad to even think like, no, you know, it's funny. Like even the person giving us that contraception could have given us something, some sort of information or asked us if we were active, or I guess they like if someone asks we want contraception, like they just obviously have to give it to you. Do you know what I mean? Because they want you to be safe. But like when I look back at it now, I'm just like, it's mad. So like my question is to you is, what would you want to change from that? I know I have no idea what they really are saying now in sex education. You've obviously educated as well. So what would you change from that? Like what would you be most passionate about teaching?
Yeah, oh my God, there's so much. Like, because sex education is actually, it's funny because very little of it is actually about sex itself. A lot of it is about things like empathy and learning about your body and learning about boundaries and learning about things that actually benefit all areas of your life. So before I even list any topics, what I would say is I would love to see sex education really viewed not as this separate subject, but something that is like built in across any kind of healthcare curriculum. Because when you think about it, like, you know, yes, maths and languages and science, all of these they are all important subjects. They're all great. But look at the problems we have in society. We have serious problems with sexual violence, with misogyny, with even like mental health issues, all of that. To me, they're the main problems that need fixing. So I want young people leaving school, okay, maybe they are failing their maths or chemistry, but if they've had really good sex relationships education, they're literally going to have a happier life. Like they're actually, and that will have ripple effects across society. We're all going to be happier. We're all going to be more open. We're all going to support each other better. You're going to have less crime then. Do you know what I mean? It's such, like, I think we just need to view it as incredibly important. It's not just like a separate subject, tick the box, you know?
Sex and intimacy can be very hard to navigate in relationships sometimes. And I feel like something that's really helped me navigate this part of my life is therapy. And that is why I'm introducing the sponsor of the podcast, BetterHelp. BetterHelp is an online therapy platform. As someone who suffers with chronic illness and can have a lot of health issues, sometimes sex and intimacy can be a very difficult thing within my relationship. And sometimes I get a little insecure and I need a little bit of reassurance and I need some tools. So that is why I love therapy, to help me through this and to help me navigate my relationship So if you're interested in therapy, I highly recommend BetterHelp. It's easy, accessible, and you can use the app anytime to talk to your therapist. So if you want 10% off your first month, all you got to do is type in betterhelp.com/Sinead. That is betterhelp.com/Sinead.
And then when it comes to topics, pleasure, you mentioned, I think sex ed should always be through a pleasure-focused lens. It shouldn't be through a risk-focused lens. You do need to talk about the risks. You do need to talk about pregnancy risk, STI, all of that. But you can do it in a way that's not shaming and not scaring them. But, you know, talking about it as a positive thing, which sounds so basic, because it's actually the number one reason in the world, statistically, people have sex is for pleasure. So, you know, it's such a wonderfully natural, fabulous thing. And if we just approach it with it from that positive pleasure focused perspective, I think it will really have, again, far-reaching effects for generations to come. I think also, so I'm passionate about talking about pleasure, really passionate about actually talking about anatomy, which sounds boring, but anatomy, not like how we learned it, really learning about, say, the clitoris, how it's shaped, how everyone's is slightly different and everyone's tilts a slightly different way. All of these things we don't know, learning that it's okay if you are turned on and maybe you're not getting wet or you're not getting hard. There's reasons why that happens. Just normalizing all of these things that our body does. And on that, learning about body image, learning about connecting to our body. Consent, obviously, is a huge one. And consent is a very complex, very layered conversation. You can't just do a consent workshop. Consent education actually needs to start at as soon as they can talk, you can start talking about boundaries and consent. Not about sex, but you build on it, right? What am I missing? Yeah, protection, media literacy, one I'm really passionate about, porn literacy. So really teaching them the skills of, okay, I saw this on TikTok or I saw this on Pornhub, thinking it through, what's real, what's not, knowing, I suppose, the difference between stuff that is just for entertainment or even trying to sell you something compared to a source of education.
Yeah,
they're the main bits I can think of. There's I'm definitely missing some, healthy and unhealthy relationships as well is another really important one. And again, when we're talking even about healthy and unhealthy relationships, we can talk about friendships within that. It's so much bigger again than just sex and relationships. Do you know what I mean? It's connected to every part of our life. It really is.
It's emotions, human behavior. If you learn about your emotions, why you're hurt, why you feel
emotional
envy,
literacy. Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I feel emotional intelligence is the most important as well. There's actually loads of skills in different areas that focus on that, but I know that Ireland and stuff don't really focus on it, but maybe they do now. But back in my day, had no tools for actual real life.
No, we didn't. But
I feel the only tools that I have. Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard it's changing, and they're meditating, and they're talking about their feelings and emotions, which is obviously amazing as well. But it just depends. Sometimes children don't even want to hear that. You know what I mean? Because I sometimes even think about them trying to teach us about these openings and us laughing. So you don't know where I suppose people want to listen, but I guess they definitely need to know about their own emotions. And
definitely, and it's kind of. We can teach young people about loads of topics, but the key thing is we actually need to model. We need to be good role models. We need to actually model these skills ourselves. And this is something that I always harp on about, because I'm you can't talk to young people about media literacy skills if your own phone use is unhealthy, or if you're resharing stuff you're seeing on social media without thinking about it, or you can't talk to a young person about consent and then at the same time, maybe, I don't know, taking pictures of them and putting them online without asking them, or, you know what I mean? It's quite complex. We really have to do a lot of inner work as adults and reflection on, okay, am I doing as I say, or am I kind of telling them to just, do it because it's the right thing to do? I need to model it as well. I'm even thinking at school, if we're talking about consent and being in touch with our bodies, but then if a child needs to go to the bathroom and we're saying, no, we have to finish this exercise, even small things like that, it's okay, conflicting messaging. So even it might be just teasing out that a little bit more, oh, can you wait just 2 minutes and then you can go, I just want to get through this, just upping the communication. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we just need to be good role models as well as saying all the right stuff.
Yeah. And in terms of, you know, what you said, you would love to educate on pleasure. I think we can all agree that when we all first began sex, it was a bit of a man's world and it was man's pleasure. And then all of a sudden, I feel like there is been this massive shift in the last 10 years of like women getting their pleasure as well, which for the first few years of my sexual life, there was no female pleasure. It was just, and also I feel like me not knowing my female pleasure was existing. Obviously you can have sex and you can have pleasure, but like really getting that orgasm and stuff like that. Like I feel like that in itself, of those years of not understanding, damaged how I felt about sex.
Absolutely. But of course it would, because if you're not enjoying it as much as they are and you're not getting pleasure out of it, it's not going to, you know, the association in your brain and your body isn't going to be a positive one when you think of sex. And I often talk about performing sex. That's something we often do because, again, if we don't get the sex ed, how are we learning about it? We might be learning about it from peers, from porn, etc. And all of that is very surface level. It's generally very performative, right? So I think as women and girls, especially going back to that phrase of, you know, sex is done to you, not with you. We learn from quite a young age to, not make a fuss, be sexy, be beautiful, be pretty, be desirable. Being good in bed seems to just be like going along with anything. Like that seems to be just what, you know, is good in bed, in inverted commas. So when you've all this like really unhelpful, like restrictive messaging, like it is going to affect your relationship with sex. I was the same. Like even when I started having sex, now I did have some good experiences, to be fair, but like, it was a mixed bag. And there was definitely some experiences that I was like, oh, I might as well have just been a doll, because there was literally no care for what I wanted. And to be fair, on my end, I didn't know how to ask for what I wanted. So I think it is about educating. I'm being very heteronormative now, excuse me, but it is about educating, I suppose, men on one hand to be like, check in, ask, prioritize her pleasure. But then on the other hand, educate and empower women to actually explore even themselves, masturbate, use toys, whatever it is, to figure out what they like and then empower them to ask for it. So it's kind of, you know, there's two, I suppose, sides to it, for want of a better word.
I do feel like when that happens, like sometimes men can feel a little bit insecure when they're asked. I suppose it matters on how you ask. So I guess, what is the best way to ask for what you would want? Yeah.
So obviously, you know, if you're turning around and being like, oh, like you're so not good at this, do this instead, you know, no one's going to want to hear that, right? I think there's a balance between being compassionate and saying things in a kind way, but also not centering male fragility in our experiences either, because there are some men who just get offended if you ask them for anything. And it's like, okay, that's from a place of entitlement. That's from a place of, why are you asking me? You know, that's not necessarily from a good place. But I would say most men actually do genuinely want their female partners to enjoy it genuinely. Just a kind of quick communication tip, I would always say, you know, again, thinking of it as a sandwich, so feedback sandwich. So maybe we're starting with, first slice of bread is like, love having sex with you, like really like hooking up, love when we do A, B, and C, whatever, just something like, you know, nice and positive to just lead into the conversation. Then the filling is the constructive bit. So maybe you're saying, you know, I would really like you to do more of A, B, or C. I'd like you to go down on me more. I'd like you to make more eye contact. I'd like if you call me this or say this to me or do this position, whatever it is, it could be anything. And then if they do that, then again saying like affirming, oh, that was really good. Like, you know, again, thanks for listening to me. It's kind of like with any communication skill, isn't it? It's just approaching it kind of in an empathetic way, not criticizing. And for men, I suppose, kind of maybe you do kind of, I suppose men are brought up with different pressures where they're maybe expected to kind of like be masculine and perform and be dominant. And none of that actually helps men or women. It's really toxic across the board. So if you can kind of start unlearning that and kind of, you know, putting the ego aside essentially a bit, we kind of have to do that to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And vulnerability leads to great sex. So yeah, just kind of asking for what you want in the sense that you're coming at it from a place of, you know, I like sex with you, but I want it to be even better. Like, I'm invested in this sexual relationship.
Yeah. Or you can like show them stuff. The other day you put up a reel and I was like, no, I was like, look at this. And you were like, oh, give this to your partner.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I was like, the one I put up the other day, I was like, that is so funny. I'm like, slow down.
Slow down.
So you were like,
oh my God.
You were like, everything you're doing, just slow it.
Just slow it down.
And I was like, that's so true. Everything you're doing, but slower.
Even when you think it's too slow, I'm like, slow it back again.
Slower.
Now, again, everyone's different, right? So there could be women out there being like, no, Jesus, I wish he'd fucking hurry up, right? So it's unique to each person. But I think, you know, the way men and women are probably socialized to have sex, it is different. So we do need to learn to communicate and not take offense. If someone is asking for something different, it doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong, you know?
Yeah.
In fact, it's a good thing if a partner is comfortable enough to say, oh, I really would like to do A, B, and C with you. Like, that's a really good sign. I'd be really happy with that if I were you. I wouldn't be taking it as a criticism. I'd be like, oh, great, they feel comfortable with me. And they want, you know, even better sex again. And I suppose it comes back to sex not being a performance, isn't it? Where we really have to check in with each other.
I think as well, like you can always tell the difference in someone who's like been in a relationship, long-term relationship, and then someone who's never been in a relationship, because obviously when you're in a long-term relationship, you can be more vulnerable, more open, and you can learn exactly what you want. And I feel like I'm really good at sharing what I want as well. And I've gotten so much more confident in my years. But even what I was saying then, like when you first start in sex, not understanding pleasure and not really understanding what an orgasm is for such a long time in your life, then always like, I would say I liked being close to my partner at the time, like partners at the time. I liked being close, but then, you know, when it came to sex, I was like, I'm not obsessed with it, but I like kissing you and being like, you know, whatever. So then when I started to understand myself more and understand, like, there is so much opportunity for pleasure and like it can be so euphoric, then it's mad then going from one mind frame to the next. And then sometimes I got into this sort of pattern of like being like, oh no, I don't want it, but then realizing I'm like, no, wait. I'm so used to being like that then when I actually enjoyed it, I was like, oh no, like it was like an automatic response for me to be like, oh no.
Yeah.
But then I realized, I was like, no, I love this.
Yeah.
And then when I'm actually having sex, I'm like, no, why would I not want this?
Yeah.
Whereas I think I trained my brain to think like I didn't want it. And then it actually took me a long time to get into that flow of actually allowing myself as well to enjoy it again and actually want it.
Yeah.
Do you find that a lot with your clients, or like, I think that's just because like it's the lack of communication around like an orgasm. Like I didn't know what an orgasm was until I read in a magazine that someone said I didn't know what an orgasm was until I used my power shower.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And I was like, what does this mean? What does this mean? And then I was like, oh, this is amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
So like imagine that's how I found out, through a magazine of like somebody writing into a column telling me that.
I know. And I love that you did find out and you did have the change of mindset, but it's ridiculous that it had to happen like that. You know, that's really, like, that should again be part of basic sex education, is what an orgasm is. For God's sake, again, like that's what a lot of people want to have. So good for you, even health-wise. Like it's great for your pelvic floor, for your mood, for everything, for release. Going back to your question, it is something I see what you described there, and it sounds kind of almost like it's coming from a place of self-protection, that you nearly kind of convinced yourself that like, no, I don't want it, I'm not mad into it. You know, sometimes women will often come to me and be like, I'm just not a sexual person, I'm just not a very sexual person. And I hear that a lot, and I'm like, okay, interesting. You know, let's dive into that. What do you mean by that? What is a sexual person? And often we think a sexual woman is like you're like Marilyn Monroe, or you're like, you know, like a sex symbol and just oozes sex appeal and talks about sex and has loads of sex and, you know, it's all sex. That's not necessarily at all what it means to be sexual, right? So you know, I kind of do quite a bit of work on, I suppose, reframing or just even questioning how women view themselves. I'm like, you don't have to be, you know, I'm trying to think of, I always go blank when I try and think of women in the media who are seen as very, very sexual. But, you know, even going back to the 90s and noughties, you know, when you had your glamour models and like lads mags and those kind of very, very, again, we would have seen as sexual women, sexy women. If we're brought up on that and that's how we see a sexual person, then we're not going to apply it to ourselves if we don't look like that and feel like oozing that sexual confidence. So sometimes it's about kind of looking at as you kind of touched on, the sex itself. Am I actually enjoying it? Am I asking for what I want? Is it something that I'm allowing myself to enjoy? Is there some internalized slut shaming going on? Because that happens where we don't actually allow ourselves to be too sexual. But also look at our view of ourselves in general as a woman. We can put ourselves in this box of, oh yeah, I'm just not sexual. And often we will find actually you are sexual. It just maybe doesn't look and sound like the media would have you think. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Yeah. So how we view ourselves. And you can have a very sexual relationship and a very sexually fulfilling relationship, and you might only be having sex, you know, once a week, twice a month, whatever. You know, it's not about having sex all the time and having amazing sex all the time. You know, masturbating is a big part of your sexuality that has nothing to do with another partner. So yeah, it's funny about the orgasm as well. I mean, people find out in all kinds of ways. I was having orgasms quite young, but I didn't know what they were. And I was really ashamed of them, actually. I thought I was doing something bad. So that was really freeing when I learned that, oh, this is actually a good thing. This is fine. And it's great because now I can show a partner how to help me orgasm, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, I'll get the questions up as well from everyone. Sorry, because I'm asking my own questions. But and then loads of people had different questions about sex. Some had questions about actual relationships as well. So we could just dive into any of those. So I guess like what we were talking about before is like being a sexual person. I think it's important to talk about libido.
Yeah.
And having a good libido or like a normal libido for like being in a long-term relationship, how to keep that libido up and how to keep it sparked. Because I feel like you're expected to just think that you're supposed to just want to have sex all the time. I mean, I've learned that, you know, women don't get aroused randomly as much, but they get aroused when they're prompted. So like through sex or through kissing or through watching TV, whilst men will be aroused really randomly and be able to just do that, whilst women need a little prompt. So that always helped me as well, because I'd be like, oh well, if I'm not in the mood, but like let's have a wee kiss, and then like it obviously gets me in the mood. So I feel like women's libido is very different from a male's, I would say.
It's how would I put this? Like I think there are differences. I wonder sometimes, is it more again down to how we're conditioned rather than this natural difference between us? Because I think, you know, I work with a lot of men who don't get turned on randomly. They actually need to be kind of that warm up period that, you know, what you're describing there of, you know, give me a kiss and let's see what happens. That's kind of responsive desire. So we're responding to like being touched. Then there's the spontaneous desire, which you mentioned as well. It's kind of randomly. And then I work with a lot of women who do get spontaneous desire and kind of feel like they're almost, again, they've some shame around that they're overly sexual. So it can happen, I suppose, to anyone of any gender, it can happen different ways. It's very unique to each person. But I would agree, and what I do see is that like women, me and my partner are actually talking about this recently as well, like women tend to need more of like a lead up to sex. They need to feel desired outside of the bedroom. They need to feel valued and supported and seen and appreciated throughout the day, not just when it comes to when he wants sex, right? So that's something. You have to set the stage for sex outside of the bedroom. With libido, I do a lot of work on kind of, again, normalizing different libidos. Like, what is a normal libido? There's no real answer to that. There really isn't. It's not about frequency of oh, we need to have sex 3 times a week, whatever. I always hear that figure for some reason. Please ignore that figure because I don't know where it comes from. Everyone always quotes it to me 3 times a week. I'm like, you don't have to have sex 3 times a week. That's literally, I don't know where that comes from. Think about the quality of sex, Is it emotionally fulfilling? Is it physically fulfilling? Again, if you're not really enjoying it, you're not going to want to have it very much. And sometimes, as you said, it is about just like, okay, I don't know, do I want to have sex? Let's do something. Let's just focus on pleasure, not sex. Let's just focus on some connection and intimacy. And we'll just see what happens. And if it doesn't happen, that's fine. That's a really good approach because then you're staying connected. You're staying in that sexual space with each other, but you're not necessarily feeling the pressure to have sex. And just to mention, libido is affected by a million different things, just like your appetite, just like your sleep, your energy levels. Your libido is affected by everything and anything that's going on in your life, in your relationship. So there are no quick answers. I would usually have a few sessions with someone and really talk through the big picture, inside and outside the bedroom.
Yeah. And like, as you said, like libido is got to do with stress as well. Even in my meditation teacher training, like when you look at like the research of your libido, realistically, if you're in fight or flight, the last thing that your body wants to do is breathe. So your body just turns off that function. So if you're someone who's a very stressed person and like, I notice that when I'm stressed, like the last thing you want to do is you want to have sex. So you have to manage your stress as well. And I think as well, when I'm feeling in that low libido, I feel like, relationships go in and out. Like me and someone, I say like, oh, we have like 1 week we'll be having sex all the time. And then the next one we wouldn't have sex all week, like it's kind of like in and out, and it's like recognizing that. But I always think like, if it went too long, I'm like, okay, like let's see my stress levels. Yeah. Let's see how I'm getting on. Like early, I always think as well, if me and Sam are doing the exact same thing every day, we're going to work, not connecting, we're just coming home watching TV. Like I don't want to have sex those days. When we're actually sitting, connecting, talking to each other, date nights, like connection really is for me, like when I want to have sex. So I feel like, when you're doing that same thing over and over again and you're not a connection really builds my libido and relieving my stress. And also like, everyone has their own bits. Like sometimes you could watch something or you could, raunchy books. Like we all love a raunchy book.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so,
I'm all for audio erotica. I love listening to sexy bits. Because women as well, we can
what
be
is
very
that? What actually is audio erotica?
So essentially it's like, the way you'd have an erotic book and you might pick it up and read it. Well, this is just the audio version. So it's like sexy stories. Like there's a few apps. There's Dipsy, there's Quinn, there's others, I'm sure. And you can listen to anything from, it could be a literal story that you're listening to. You could be listening to like, it's like you're listening to 2 people flirt and have sex. It could be like a where the actor is kind of talking to you. So they're telling you to touch yourself. Like there's so many different forms of it. And women, we always hear men are very visual. And again, I don't want to be super like divided and about it because I sometimes I don't think that helps. But women do tend to love kind of words and being told things and being talked to in a certain way. I find that extremely erotic. Like I was talking to my partner before and like I could send him a picture of myself and he could like, I shouldn't be saying this now, it'd kill me. But like, he's a man. He can look at it. He can get off on that picture, right? If he sends me a picture, I'd be like, oh, stunning. There's not a hope I'll get off on that. Not a hope. And it's nothing about him. It's just that's not how my brain works. But if he like says something to me in a certain tone of voice or speaks to me in a certain way that he might even realize he's doing it, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so turned on, right? So, again, it's about learning about ourselves and what gets us excited. And just to mention as well, because you made a really important point, like, that connection, as you said, that's when you feel usually like having sex. So that's setting the stage. Outside of sex, keep dating each other. And it's not, you don't have to go out on expensive dates. Dating each other can be a free night at home where you put away your phones and you play some kind of game or literally anything. I suppose there's a few different things to be aware of there with libido. And just one last thing I wanted to say on that. You mentioned stress. Stress absolutely impacts libido. And what we have an accelerator system in our brain and we have a brake system. And all the media teaches us is about the accelerator system, how to get turned on, use this position, wear this lingerie, have a night away, buy the new toy. It's all about pressing on the accelerator. Whereas actually, think about it, if you're driving, if you have your foot in your brake and you're putting your foot in the accelerator, you're not going anywhere. You have to lift off the brake before touching the accelerator. So that brake, like that could be pulling that brake on your libido, that could be stress. Or it could be feeling like, God, I don't feel like my partner even sees me. Or I feel like I'm doing way too much housework and my partner's not doing any. It could be anything. You have to take your foot off the brake, because if you're just focusing on the accelerator, you're probably not going to get anywhere, right? So remembering that is important.
That reminds me about a good book I read that had something similar, Come As You Are.
That's where I read it. Book. Yeah, that's it. Come As You Are. Amazing book, well worth reading. And another one for listeners, book recommendations. Mating in Captivity by Esther Perel is a fantastic, fantastic book about kind of long-term monogamy and desire. Because remember, listeners, long-term monogamy is a very new concept, because we're living long lives now. Longer than ever. We're living till we're like, what, 86 or something, isn't it, roughly? So we're kind of expected to have these monogamous relationships for like, I'm going to say 50, 60 years.
Yeah.
There's no blueprint for that, of how you keep excited for 50 and 60 years. It's not saying you can't do it. It's saying that it's okay if you're struggling to do it, even a few years in, because it's quite a new concept.
That is actually such an interesting concept to like think about, because you don't actually think about that as well. And I actually read both those books. I absolutely loved Mating in Captivity as well. But I want to read it again actually, because it was such a good book. And it's just a book about, domestic, like it's about how to just like keep things spiced up. She also talks a lot about, she actually is uncovering problems within the book, isn't she?
Mm-hmm.
Like she's basically talking to couples and like how they've lost their spark and then how she gets it back for them. So it's a really, really, really good book. She also has that State of Affairs. Have you read that?
I haven't read that yet, but I will. It's on a very long list I have to read. But I'd read anything from her. She's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're listening, State of Affairs like was something that was a massive amount of closure for me in terms of like if you've been cheated on before, because obviously it's about cheating and the reason why people cheat, and it goes into like deep dive. So like it gives you that closure, because if someone has cheated on you, you've broken up and they're like, oh, we don't know why I did it, oh, I was drunk, like that's not a good enough answer. Like there's more there. Yeah, and that book is amazing for that. And her also Mating in Captivity is also amazing. I think anything reading about sex and relationship education is just, sometimes I be reading books and I'd be like, as if we don't know this, as if we are all in relationships all our life and we do not know how to have these conversations. We don't know what happens when we're feeling upset. We don't know that our partners can have different reactions. And there's just so much. I'm reading one as well called Hold Me Tight.
Oh, I haven't heard that. What's that?
Yeah, it's like a relationship book as well.
Fab.
Like honestly, I'm obsessed with relationship books. I just read them all day. Because I actually don't. I used to not understand, why do I love relationships so much and love talking about them, and I'm like, realistically, like my biggest fear really is to be alone. So I want to make my relationship work, and I would say like another one of my biggest fears is to have no intimacy in my relationships. Like I'm a very physical touch, very intimate, very like all my friends are like, you're so obsessed with your boyfriend. I'm like, I swear I am. I'm just like,
I'm like, I want to be
too.
Like that.
Yeah, like I'm so upset. They're like, you're such a weirdo, you're so obsessed. He walks around the house and I'm like, he's the most gorgeous man that's ever walked this earth. And like I am just so obsessed with him, and I never ever ever want to lose that. And I have not lost that, because like I feel like the education on love and relationships, like if I feel distant or I feel like I'm losing that, like I am like, no, I'm gonna read this and this and this and learn how to get all this back. I feel like that's just something that I fear the most. Like I fear like being older and like them sitting in one chair, me sitting in the other, them in one room, me in the other. That's like my biggest fear. Yeah. So I think that's why I'm so passionate about relationships.
I'm probably the same. Yeah, I'm probably hugely like that. My parents are separated and love them both. They're very civil, But, you know, they wouldn't have, like, basically, if I were to craft a relationship for myself, it wouldn't be that. And like, they would know that as well. And, you know, I just think, like, cliche as it is, life is so short. And a lot of the joy we get out of life is actually from our relationships, not even just romantic, just like the people, the connections we have. But there's no denying that your romantic relationship or your companion, for, you know, whatever way you want to put it, is hugely impactful on your general happiness and well-being. And like, I'm the same as you. Like, and I've had to learn to pull back a bit, because I'm like, oh my God, we haven't had sex in 2 weeks. Oh my God, like, panic, what's happening? I used to be like that. And I'm like, well, yeah, you didn't, because you were sick the first week, and then the second week, whatever, you know, like, just to kind of calm down a bit and not panic. And, you know, you, like you say, reading those books or listening to podcasts, whatever it is, if you're informing yourself about, like, the science of relationships or the realities of it or other people's experience, then it stops you from going, I think, into that panic state and maybe making bad decisions, or even sabotaging a relationship, because you can kind of see, oh, okay, this is actually what's happening here, you know? I'm absolutely the same. And I think there's always, always, always more to learn. Like, I've been with my partner, we'll be together 5 years in 2 weeks, and I know, like, I want to be with him for, I never say forever, I'm just that person, I'm a very literal thinker and I don't like the word, but I want to be with him for years and years and years and years, you know, as long as I can. And even though we've only been together 5 years, the amount of learning in that 5 years has been insane. And he has taught me so much. It's not me, the expert, teaching him. It's we teach each other, you know. And I think to keep a relationship fresh, as they say, you know, fresh, spicy, whatever way you want to put it, you have to keep learning about each other. You can never sit back and think, I've him figured out now. You know, we know everything there is to know about each other. You don't. You never can know everything about anyone, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. I love that. Right, okay. Sorry. I keep getting carried away.
No, you're fine.
Oh, actually, can we please, somebody put in the question box and they were like, tell her to tell the story with the photocopier and her best friend, her ex. And I'm like, what is this? I need to know.
This is so silly. You know, when your friend is going out with someone fucking awful and you're like, how do I insert myself into this? Because I'm just this person who can never just stand by. I'm really honest, and I'll be like, look, I love you, I support you, but I think he treats you really badly, right? I'll be that person. But anyway, my one of my dear friends was in a relationship years ago, and like, he was desperate. Like, he just was so, do you know when your friend is just like a goddess and you're like, how is this guy still holding on to you? And anyway, she uncovered that he was texting loads of girls, and like, it seemed like he probably was cheating on her. There was definitely lots of stuff going on. And I somehow, because I have a flair for theatrics, I somehow convinced her that she should print out, not confront him yet, print out all the screenshots and serve them in an envelope at lunch. And so I went into the office. It was my old colleague who sent that in, I think. And I won't say where I worked because they'd kill me for using their ink for this, but I printed out it was like 57 pages of screenshots, put them in an envelope, came home and gave them to my friend. And I think she went off and did it. So that was just this. I was just so dramatic. Like, I wouldn't do that these days, but I was like, no, you need to have your moment. Like, you need to catch him on the hop. You can't give him a chance to wiggle his way out of this. So that's it. Very bold.
So what happened?
Oh, they broke up. Thank God. And she's with she's married now with a fab man, kids, the whole lot. And happy ever after.
I'm obsessed with that.
Yeah, I'm just that friend, Sinead. I actually sometimes need to like get back in my box because I will just get sometimes too involved.
I'm like the friend that's like, I know exactly what you're going through. I'm going to be here for you, because I remember going through all that stuff and like being with a person that probably shouldn't have been with.
Oh, same.
But, like, all my friends turning on me.
Yeah.
Not turn on me, but like, it was really hard if they were like, I don't want to hear about it. Don't want to talk about him because you shouldn't be with him, blah, blah, blah. But like, I really just needed someone to just be there, and then I was going to uncover all that myself. And like, I feel like I'm always there, even though I know they're not going to last, and I know that they're going to break up. I'm just there. I'm just like, I'm just waiting for you.
Yeah.
And I just want to Yeah.
I'm the same now.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna focus on my friend and hope that she sees the light at some point, you know.
Yeah. Okay. The next question is, could you maybe share some strategies for deepening emotional intimacy and trust with a partner?
Okay. I suppose that's a really big question because I don't know exactly what's behind it, right? So
maybe like getting deeper into like the relationship, like obviously when you get into a relationship, the very beginning is very deep, and then it can sometimes be surface level, and like how to keep that deep intimacy.
You kind of need to keep talking, as boring as it sounds, and you need to be I feel you need to be quite intentional with your communication. So, you know, the way we talk, like sometimes I might find, you know, me and Ivan might have gone a week, and because we both work, we're both very busy, we've a lot of stuff going on, we might nearly be like passing each other, kind of like, hey, how are you? Love you, you know, that kind of thing. So I think scheduling time and putting time aside specifically for intimacy, and call it intimacy. For example, like a really simple tip or idea would be like, you can get these intimacy cards. They're kind of like a deck of cards, right? And you can ask each other questions. Like, I think that's such a stunning little date night idea. I think doing anything like where it's very intentional time together, no phones, right? We all need to get off the feckin' phones. Like I go on about this. I'm like, I can't imagine even the effects we're not aware of yet that phones have had on our intimacy and relationships, right? Put them in a box somewhere, have a few hours just for ye, or whatever you can spare. And I just feel when you're in that setting where you've put away screens and phones, you're just with each other and you're doing something nice, like even make a bit of pottery together, paint each other, play Twister, do whatever it is. When you're in that setting, the conversation is probably going to come more openly. You're probably going to get to a deeper place because you're setting the stage for it. And those cards can help you actually ask really interesting questions. Because, you know, sometimes all we ask is, how was your day? How was work? So it's intentional is the word I always use, always trying to be a bit more intentional. That's just the main thing.
I'm like, I have cards everywhere. Like, I have cards on the mantelpiece. I have cards when I walk in. I have cards in the shelf.
Love that.
And if me and Sam, like, say for example, we're like doom scrolling, we're like we're maybe watching TV. When he's playing a Candy Crush and he's watching the TV at the same time, I'm going, pick a card.
I do that. Yeah.
Pick a card. And he's like, oh, and then like we pick a card. We don't do it all the time. Like when we first started going out, like we would have done it. I would have done that all the time. We love doing that. Like I love doing that. Like that's, I mean, it's such a girl thing, isn't it? But
I love it.
Every so often we just pick a card, and we don't do it. Like, it's not as intense as it used to be. Like we just like every so often when we're both like really out of whack and we're just sitting watching TV and we're like, we look like we just haven't spoken, like pick a card, and then we do that. Sometimes we do it before bed. I don't do it all the time now, but another good thing is, have you ever heard of the app Agape?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, it's basically just like that. It's like cards, but like every day gives you a question of the day.
That's like there's another app called Paired that sounds like it's very similar. Yeah, they're great. They're great as well.
Yeah, and like you can pay for them, or you can just get mine's is free, and I just get a question of the day. And sometimes I do it with my friends. It's sometimes very generic, but it'll be like, you know, what was your first job or something, and then it's like sparks that interesting conversation. So I think like. And I will be very aware of times of like we haven't connected. So I always make sure that like, and like I'm very lucky my boyfriend knows that as well. And he's like, let's put a date night in or whatever. So
that's so nice. Checking in with each other, having regular check-ins, take a little, you're checking the heartbeat of the relationship almost. Yeah. Review. I'm just conscious.
Do you do fan-offs?
Say that again, sorry.
Have you heard of fan-offs?
No.
Oh yeah. So that's what I do I used to do it every few weeks, every month maybe. It's like feeling, affirmation, need, ownership, and struggle, and you have to just go through it. And sometimes it takes 10 minutes, sometimes it takes half an hour.
Yeah.
But like you go for a walk, like we do it, all my friends do it now, and like we all do it with our partners, and it's just, you know, I feel, you have to say I feel, you can say I feel secure, I feel insecure, I feel good, I feel content, blah blah. Then you say like affirmation, you'd be like, really, thank you so much for taking the bins out this week. Then you say your need, I need a little bit of me time. I need to focus on something. ownership is like, I'm sorry that, you know, I lashed out that day. And then struggle is anything you're struggling with. And like, honestly, we just do that quickly and anything just comes out on the table.
That's
and
stunning,
that for me makes us so close.
I love the structure of that as well. We have regular check-ins, but we don't have like a structure. But like, again, it's whatever works, and something like that can be really helpful because it can kind of focus you and kind of ask again those intentional questions. I'm conscious as well in the question you were asked, there was a mention of trust. I think trust is not something that like you can accelerate, or, you know, trust really is a much trickier one. It is built slowly, and, you know, we learn to trust someone when essentially they show us, right, that we can trust them, and they follow through on their words. You know, they meet their words with actions, things like that. If they say, you know, they love you and they appreciate you, okay, but are they showing it? Okay, great, then I trust them when they say they love me because they're showing me. But I would say as well, it's worth doing some self-reflection sometimes on, you know, are they giving me all the reasons to trust them and I just can't because of my own stuff? You know, it's a complicated one. So, you know, I do think the intentional communication can help with all that. But sometimes when it comes to trust, it's not actually just about the other person. It can be actually about you. And why don't you trust them? What's coming up there?
Yeah. I think as well, like, if you don't trust them and it's because of your past, of your own trust issues from before, like, I just think it's important to like communicate that. Yep. And it's good when they understand that you have different needs because of something that happened to you. Like, so as someone that's been cheated on, like, there's always that in the back of your mind. So when I begin a relationship, I do have those trust issues, but I am very communicative towards him. And like, when I was started going out with Sam, and like, you know, I'd be like, oh, well, that would, like, I would tell him about that, and he would be like, well, what can I do? Where can I, like, honestly, it was just like the easiest thing ever. And then after like a few times where you're having those conversations, like, you don't even have to hassle them anymore because he's so involved in making me feel secure. You know what I mean? Because sometimes men can be like, oh, stop being a psycho, which is, I hate that word so much. And that is so frustrating, because just because you've never been cheated on or you've never had an experience with infidelity doesn't mean that someone else hasn't experienced that and has to, you know, you have to support them sometimes, even though like it's not your fault, but you still have to support them. And when you do, life becomes easier for both of you. So
absolutely. And I think you, as you said, they might have been cheated on, but when we think of empathy is a skill, and like, we don't empathize with necessarily an experience, we empathize with an emotion. So, you know, okay, so say if I've been cheated on and my partner hasn't, okay, the fact that I've been cheated on is bringing up what emotions? Maybe it's bringing up insecurity. So my partner might know what it's like to be cheated on, but he does know what it's like to feel insecure, because that's a human feeling. So we need to empathize with each other's feelings, even if we have never had the experience. Like, that's not an excuse. You know, it's not like, well, I've never been through that, so I can't understand. It's like, you don't have to understand the experience. You just need to try and connect with the emotion, because we all have the same set of emotions. Yeah. So I think that's really important as well, just like in that communication piece, is that empathy skill, because it is a skill that we can strengthen.
Yeah, for sure. So we're coming towards the end. I thought the last thing I would just ask you is like, so every season I do have, you know, a sex educator on here, and I always ask them the question about porn. And every single time I've had a completely different answer. Interesting. And it's so interesting to see everyone's point of view. Yeah. I remember I had Jenny Keane on, and she was all for porn. She was like, it's very educational, but like the ethical porn, and she talked about ethical porn subscriptions and stuff like that, and she had them on her website. And then I had AJ on, AJ, he's like Australian, and he like, as a male as well, like, to get that perspective, I remember he was just like, nah, if you're in a relationship, I don't think you should be doing it. You should be spending your time with your partner and using your like energy there and stuff like that. He's like, why do I want to look at someone else when I have that person in front of me? And like, his view really changed me, because I feel like in my life, I think we've always grown up of like, men use porn, that's fine. And like, that was, and then when I heard him, I was like, God, that actually makes sense. And I've actually seen a lot of people online now on like TikTok doing this thing called, I don't know if you've heard about it, it's like a porn detox or something, where they're basically like abstaining. Yeah, like a lot of men are abstaining and and seeing how they feel, and they're documenting it. And I find that so interesting to see their views.
Yeah, porn is such like an emotive topic. People have very strong opinions either way. I think with porn, okay, so I agree a few of the points there straight off the bat. Ethical production, like the industry is a whole other conversation, because I don't want to be glamorizing or encouraging people to engage with the absolutely horrendous parts of the industry that do exist, right? So yeah, if we're assuming, I'm going to assume who I'm talking to out there, you're all adults, because porn and young people, again, is kind of a different conversation in my opinion. It's more complex again. But you're adults, and we're thinking about like ethically produced porn. No one's getting, God forbid, trafficked or exploited or hurt or anything like that, right? It's consensual adults making porn. I think, and I know this sounds like a bit of a vague answer, but because it's so complex, I do think it has to be a bit vague, in the sense of it's really about your relationship with it. So I don't believe I don't think it has a responsibility to be educational. It's not there to be educational. Just like we watch a Netflix show, it's not there to educate us, unless it is literally, branded an educational show. It's entertainment. It's the entertainment industry. And I think it's more from the fact that we're not getting the sex ed or the information otherwhere that we turn to porn. And that's what's kind of happened. So I think porn can help people in a lot of ways. Like, it can normalize things. Like, I've talked to women who are like, I saw women masturbating in porn for the first time and I realized it was normal. Or I saw someone with this different body type or these different nipples or this different vulva or whatever. And so there can be so much good in it. And at the end of the day, sometimes it's just something we enjoy. It's just a pleasure. But it can be harmful if people are using it in a way that they almost feel addicted to it, or it's a compulsive use. If it's affecting their view of women, that can happen. If it's warping their view of their self-image or their partner, then it's time to maybe seek help about that and unpack that. I don't think there can be a simple answer to you should be or you shouldn't be watching it. It's just, I just think for me, it would be irresponsible for me to give that answer, because I truly don't believe that. I think it's really about assessing your relationship with it. And in a couple, in a relationship, have that conversation. Don't assume that your partner is or isn't. We should make this is bad grammar in English. We should make as least assumptions as possible, as little assumptions as possible, because some people might be really upset that you are accessing it, and that needs to be maybe a conversation. Why you're using it, what
that's
you
what
get
I
out
noticed
of it.
in the questions.
Yeah,
some people were for it. Some people were really upset that their partner was doing it, and then like I found like a very varying amount. I suppose it just depends on your experience and like how you were taught about porn, I guess.
And like what.
But it's interesting to hear everyone's different takes on it, and everyone's. But then I suppose it just depends on your libido, what you like what you're getting. Like I always think like sometimes every situation is very different in term an individual. Like someone like me who has chronic health issues that has got to do with that can affect me sexually. I'd be like, oh well, maybe that would be okay, because obviously I can't be the best girlfriend that I can be, but I don't. Yeah, like I don't know, like I sometimes I'm like, if I found that out, I probably wouldn't care. But then but like I have no idea, and nor do I want to know. So I'm just like,
see, I'm the same as you. Like I assume my partner probably watches porn, right? But I am confident in the fact that it's not a problem. Like, it's not something that's going on all the time. It doesn't affect, if he is, I know it doesn't affect his desire for me. Like, there's nothing that has happened in our relationship, our sex life, that has raised a red flag of that. But for some, that does happen, where, sometimes, again, I think there's a bit of science behind this, where like, if we're viewing, I suppose, quite hardcore stuff, we can kind of get desensitized and we want harder and harder and harder. And that can end up becoming distressing for the person themselves. And if they're expecting their partner to do stuff, like, it's kind of back to the media literacy, isn't it? Because part of media literacy isn't just understanding what we're seeing on the screen. It's actually understanding how it impacts us and our life as well. So for some people, it might be the best option just not to watch it. For other people, it might be just changing how we watch it. But I think communicating about it, it's a tough conversation, but it's very much worth having.
Yeah, for sure. I just want to thank you so much as well for coming on today. Can you please let us know? I know you have a few courses as well, and just your Instagram and stuff, and where people can find you.
Yeah, so my course is booked up this time, but I will be coming back with it early next year. It's called Better Sex for Women. But I would encourage you to please follow me. It's Grace Alice O'Shea. My website is gracealice.com. That's where you can like book in a session and all those bits. And I have a podcast called The G-Spot as well. They're my main bits. So yeah, thank you so much, Sinead, for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you so much. But yeah, that's it.